All right, so one thing that I want to make sure we're aware of, back when we did the Beyonce lesson, right? Like on does Beyonce write her own lyrics, and we took those samples, we did the convenience sample, and then we also talked about voluntary response. Those were two places that bias can show up. So just to write that at the top, there are two sampling methods that can lead to bias, okay? And those sampling methods are convenience sampling, right? And then also voluntary response. Okay, so remember, voluntary response is when a general call is put out to the public and people volunteer to be in the sample, like they're not selected to be in the sample. Okay, so those are two areas that we already know bias can show up, and that's in how we get our sample. The other ones that we're talking about today that we just talked about in those examples are other ways that show up. So we've got under coverage, right? So under coverage is when some people in the population are less likely to be chosen, right? So some examples of that are like calling the landlines, or if we only survey homeowners, then we're leaving out people who rent or who live in apartments or who live with multiple families, right? So that's one type, under coverage. Another type of bias that shows up is non-response. So non-response, that's the situation when people either can't be reached or they refuse to answer. So we had that show up a couple times in those scenarios. So example, like they don't answer the phone, they hang up on the phone call, they get mailed a survey and they don't return the survey. All of those are situations that are non-response. One thing to pay attention to is that non-response is very different from voluntary response. In non-response, that means these people actually have been selected to be a part of the survey. They're not volunteering to be a part of it, but they've been selected and they just choose not to participate. Where voluntary response, people are not selected. It's just a general call that's put out, like answer this poll or give us a review, that kind of thing. And people either volunteer to be a part of it or don't. And in this case, the people who do volunteer usually have very strong opinions. All right. The third type of bias that shows up, besides the sampling types, is response bias. And response bias is when you get answers to your survey that maybe aren't quite truthful. This is usually this is just problems in the data gathering. So like the fireman showing up in his uniform, or in the instrument, or the process, like, the principal being the one who emails, or sometimes it's, people lie about their answers. This is what we call self-reported responses. So people aren't always truthful. And then also how the question is worded can also give response bias. Like if the question is leading or trying to get people to answer in a certain way, then that it also causes response bias. All right, so what I want you to do now is to work through the check your understanding, and then on the next video, we will go through that together.